Hi everyone, welcome back to another SimplePlanes video. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make custom wings in SimplePlanes. So, let's get started. The first step in making custom wings is planning out what type of wing you're going to make, the size, parameters, what's going to be included in it, and so on. In this video I'm going to be making the SWL-120's tail section, which is the tail and the two horizontal stabilizers. Although I can just make one then mirror it over to the other side. I'm going to start with the horizontal stabilizers. Now before we start making them, we want to plan out how big we're going to make them. And based on some blueprints, like I know the SWL-120 is a fictional plane, however it's sort of based off the 787 Dreamliner, so I'm going to be making the wings sort of based on the 787. And based on the blueprints, I can see the wings start about here, like the leading edge, and the trailing edge at the base ends about here somewhere. So these two sections. I'm going to start with making the airfoil. We can't just simply drag out an airfoil because that doesn't exist in the base game. So we need to make our own. I use what I call the 5-part airfoil. There is a 3-part airfoil technique which you can easily use, however especially for main wings, which have flaps, slats, a bunch of other small things that move, like spoilers. A 5-part airfoil is better than a 3-part airfoil for that, because it allows us to have a simple trailing edge, which is just two flat fuselage pieces, instead of slicing out from the custom 3-part airfoil. We're going to start with the leading edge. When I get out a hollow fuselage, I'm just going to set my own parameters. You don't have to do this, I just do it so it doesn't mess up the flight profile. I have a hollow fuselage. We also want to know how thick we want the airfoil to be. This does take a bit of practice to get right, however based on the blueprints and their about thickness, I think I'm going to want a thickness of about 1. And according to my blueprints, it's a little less than the thickness of the main wings, so I'm just going to check the main wings. And these have a thickness of 1, however that is scaled up to 2, so we have an equivalent thickness of 2. So the main wings have a thickness of 2, assuming the scale is 1, which means the tail section can actually have a thickness of 1.5. I'm going to make the width twice that, so 3. I'm going to set it into circular. I'm going to do the same because this is the base airfoil. It's not tapering off yet. This is just a base airfoil, so I can show you what I'm talking about. I always like to start with a base airfoil because that way we have like a base to start off with. We're not trying to nudge parts around when we taper them off. 4.5 and 3. I'm also going to make the length less than 2, so about that much. We're also going to nudge this because for main wing, the fuselage will be straight, but since this is the tail section where it's tapering off, the base airfoil is actually going to be nudged inside it, so about at the back it'll be nudged inside to here, but because it's actually expanding towards the front, since the airfoil is going to be straight, going straight, when we get to the front leading edge, it'll actually be in here, not out here. So this definitely does look like an airfoil. So we're going to use the Fuselage Slicing feature, and we're going to cut exactly half off the trailing edge. So we have our leading edge. Now, for the tail section, we're actually going to use a 4-part airfoil. It's going to be 4 parts. Because instead of doing a semi-symmetrical airfoil, we're actually going to use a symmetrical airfoil. We're going to duplicate our leading edge. We're going to first cut off the front half. For now, it's going to leave the right fill 100%. So then we have a perfect back half of the leading edge. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the height at 1.5, but I'm going to make the width something like 10. Which looks like that. Now, this is why I scaled them up. I'm just going to scale this up to 2.222. The reason I scale these parts up is so I don't have to keep XML modding these values out of the maximum allowed values in the editor. while it is scaled up, it means I can have a bigger unmodded like an XML modded fuselage. Now because we scaled it up, we want to cut the height in half from 1.5 to 0.75. I want to do the same for the leading edge. It does make the length twice as long, but because it's going to be buried inside the tail, we don't need to worry about that. Now we're going to come back to our middle section of the airfoil, and we're going to cut the back of it off. And I'm going to cut it to about, so see this corner here? Now, because even though it's circular, because of how geometry works in a 3D model game, or really any 3D modeling software, it doesn't have an infinite number of lines to make it a circle. It's actually a 24-sided shape. If we look closely at the tail section here, we can see it's actually 24 sides. So we're going to slice it until it's just about this corner. It's right here. You don't have to get it exact, but I want it to be about there. And we're going to do the same for the back part, like the back part of the length. And now I have the middle section of our airfoil. And now for the back part of the airfoil. And also, if we're making a semi-symmetrical airfoil, we would not just have this one piece here, we would instead take it off. We would make the bottom fill 50%, and then you would actually make, let's say, the height be 0.5. Actually, I'm going to make it 0.6. Leaving 0.15 for the lower section. I'm going to make this 0.15, and now we're going to make the top fill be 50%. Now I have the bottom section. Now because of this, it does take some nudging to get it down because it's not the same height for the middle section of the airfoil and the leading edge. I'm just going to nudge it to about there. I'm going to do the same for the bottom section. And there we go, that is a semi-symmetrical front half of the airfoil. Now for the back, either way we're going to need 2 flat fuselage pieces. However, for symmetrical we want them to be exactly symmetrical. However, for semi-symmetrical we want the bottom one to be flatter, so less of an angle, and the top one to be more of an angle. I'm just going to revert what I did, and now get back to our symmetrical airfoil. To make our flat piece, I'm just going to grab this part here. I'm going to make all the fills 100%. I'm going to make it not a hollow fuselage. You can either just drag another fuselage out, or I'm just going to change it to fuselage body one. There we go, not hollow. I'm going to make the corners hard. And we're going to make the height as little as we can. Now even though this is as little as we can without causing some issues with the geometry, we can still make this thinner. We're going to get a top fill. We're going to drag that down all the way to something like 10. And I found through testing with the previous wings, like months ago of making them, that if we do anything less than 10%, that will eventually cause some weird geometry issues. So we have as little height as we can, and then on top of that we cut it by 90%, so we cut 90% off. You can try making it thinner, but first this is as thin as we need it. Now we make it in the same x-axis as the airfoil. And this is way too long for what we're looking for, so I'm going to make it 4. The purposes which I'm going to explain in a little bit, I'm going to cut off exactly half of the leading edge, or the front section. Now what we're going to do is we're going to quickly nudge this in place. So I want the front bit of this back piece here, this bit here, to be exactly touching, not the very back of it, but instead this angle here. I'm just going to quickly fix that. So I'm going to XML the full percentage to be a very precise number, so it's exactly at this angle. That way, for my purposes, it is easier to show. This does take a lot of trial and error though. And done. So that way, instead of trying to make this edge here be perfectly on the angle, the angle is the end of this fuselage. I'm going to nudge the edge of this piece here into the back of the edge of the middle section of the airfoil. So now I have it into the back, but there is one issue. It's not really the right angle, so we want to go about here. Now this goes back to why we cut exactly half of the leading edge off. If we get a rotation, we can see that since the rotation axis is exactly this leading edge here, we can simply rotate it. What I'm also going to do is, since this is a symmetrical airfoil and not a semi-symmetrical airfoil, we want these two flat pieces to meet exactly in the middle, so we want the rotation to be the same for each piece. I'm just going to put another piece in the exact same position as this piece, but on the lower section. Since I'm going to try and get it in exactly the same position, what we can do is we can ensure it's in exactly the same equivalent y-axis and z-axis. We can simply just take the z-axis, but for the y-axis, what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract this y-axis from this y-axis to get this number. Then I'm going to make the bottom piece's y-axis the same as the middle piece's y-axis. Then I can nudge it down. That's not right. Why is that? I just remembered why. Because of these fills. So we're going to have the top fill be 100%, and the bottom fill can be 10%. And done. And now we can just play around with the rotation. In this case, we're going to use the z-axis rotation. I'm going to make sure these two pieces meet exactly in the middle, but actually what I'm going to do is, since this angle looks about right compared to the rest of the airfoil, I'm simply going to extend the length of both these pieces. And done. Now I have the base airfoil. I'm just going to make sure the connections are correct, so all the parts are connected to, say, the leading edge. Usually I just want to have the connections connected to a single part which you can move around. In this case I want mine to be the leading edge. There we go, base airfoil. It is a tiny bit longer than what I was thinking of, but actually according to my blueprints, it actually goes to about here somewhere, so we're fine. And I can just add a connection to the actual tail itself, then I can nudge it down to where it's going to go. So it's going to actually be nudged into about just poking out, so like this. However, I'm just going to nudge it out to about there, so we can easily look at it and work on it. So now I have a base airfoil, we can start to make the actual wing. I'm going to start at the leading edge, and this is where I'm going to create the leading edge of the wing that tapers off to the end of the wing. For the horizontal stabilizer on the tail, I'm going to have one main segment, and then I'm going to have a bunch of small ones that make it taper off and curve off. That looks about like the length we need, so I'm going to actually make it something like 8.5, and I'm going to make the height be something like, I don't know, 0.15. Twice that is 0.3, and then I'm going to use Run to make it taper off, well actually not taper off, but Run makes it sweep to the back, and then Rise makes it rise, and 1.5 looks about right. So now I have the leading edge of the wing. For the middle section of the airfoil, or really the main section, the length is the same as the leading edge, the Rise and Run are also the same. However, for the width, of course it's not the leading edge. The width is actually 10 times the height. Actually, it's not. So we're just going to make sure the ratio of width to height is the same for the tip as it is in the base. So 10 divided by 0.75 is the ratio that is not something we want. It's 13.3 recurring. So 13.33333 forever. So 0.15 is not a good height. 0.25 or 0.125. I'm going to pick a 0.125. Let's see how well that goes. Actually, it's not the height here. It's this height back here that's the problem. A width of 10 to a height of 0.75 gets a ratio of 13.3 recurring, which is not ideal. We could technically use that ratio, then just have the width of the tip of the main section be a long string of numbers, but that is not ideal. I think the best solution here is to figure out a ratio that does not give a recurring string of numbers, and instead gives maybe a few decimal places. Interestingly, a width of 9.75 divided by 0.75 gives a ratio of 13, not 13.3 recurring. Therefore I'm going to make the width be instead 9.75. I could simply nudge both of the trailing edge pieces forward by a small amount. Because this is a symmetrical airfoil and not a semi-symmetrical airfoil, I can simply copy the length from the top piece and apply it to the bottom piece. And there we go. And now we need to make sure we times whatever our height is. In this case, I'm going to make it and be what I had, 0.15. So we need to times that height by 13. So 0.15 times 13 equals 1.95. 1.95 can be the width, and upon looking at that, it does not look right at all. To fix this problem, I'm going to make the height twice as much. Therefore, the leading edge width will be twice as much again, and the same goes for the main fuselage width. And twice 1.95 is 3.9, and this looks much better. It doesn't have enough run though, so I can simply just do that. That looks about right. And now for the trailing edge. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated, because this is where the control surfaces go. I'm going to make the base wing though, so I can simply just add length of 0.5. And this is where we can't just use the previous values. We can't just use the rise of 1.5 and the run of -4. Because if I were to do that, it would instead look weird. Like this. And also one thing I just forgot, and just remembered, is when we're done adjusting the base airfoil fuselage pieces, like the trailing edge, we can then make the fills be 100% again, not the half the leading edge be cut off, like this. Then we can make the width be exactly half of what it was before, to 5.4, turns into 2.7, and then we can simply nudge them back into place. The reason we don't just leave them at half cut off is because it will make control surface construction a little more difficult later. The z-axis can be simply copied and pasted, however for the y-axis we'll again need to do some simple math, which is just subtracting the lower y-axis coordinate, which in this case is actually the trailing edge fuselage piece, from the middle piece's y-axis coordinate. So in this case we subtract this number from the other number. And we can set the nudge amount to be that number. Then we make the y-axis of the top trailing edge piece to be the same as the middle piece here. And then just nudge it up by 1. And there we go. Now I can just adjust the fuselage piece to make the trailing edge of the airfoil. I'm going to start with the width. So the width is definitely going to be related to the tip. So and I can't really remember how I did this because it's been a little while since I did the base airfoil for the wings. The width can be determined. We don't have to do trial and error for the width. What we need to do, we need to find out the percentage of the change in width. It will be easier if my height was not 0.75 and was instead 1, but we can work with that. And of course, after doing some more math calculations, it looks like we're dealing with more random strings of numbers again. It would be really helpful if my height was 1. So after doing some math calculations, I think we're going to have to deal with long strings of numbers. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to times 0.75 by 1.33333333 recurring. Really just a lot of 3's, and eventually that will just round out to 1. Here's what we're going to do. This was easy in the other wings because the height was 1, but in our wings it's not. So therefore we're going to have to scale this up. So we're going to times 0.75 and 0.3 by 1.3 recurring, or really a lot of 3's, to get 1, and for 0.3, that turns out to be 0.4. So 1 minus 0.4 is 0.6. So what we're going to do now, I think I'm remembering this correctly, is we then times 2.7 by 60% or 0.6, which gets us 1.62. 1.62 is then the width of the tip section of the trailing edge piece. Now what we're going to do, we're going to go into orthographic side view. So really what we're trying to do is, we're trying to use rise and run, I'm going to start with rise, to make the trailing edge piece, really the corner of the trailing edge piece, tip, so you can see this piece here the cursor is. This piece needs to be at the corner of the main piece here, similar to how it was in the base airfoil. I can just solve this part clipping issue.
5 minutes later.
I sort of solved it, but now my shaders are being weird, I'll just turn them off. It was something to do with mass. Anyway, we're able to zoom in to this corner here. So we're going to use Vise and Van. I'm going to start with Vise because that way we can adjust the edge. Using Vise, we're going to make sure the edge, well, the top of the edge, because it's still a 3D shape. You can see that it does have a bit of width. You want to make sure the top of that edge just matches the top of the main fuselage edge. You can see we're zoomed in a lot, but we want to use every last decimal that we can in this percentage. So you can see if I type anything else, it just rounds up or down. Then, when it's perfectly aligned, we can then use Run. And then I can realize that I've somehow messed this up, because we can see, hey, that does not look right. Actually, none of it looks right at all. Like I said, this does take a lot of trial and error, and even though I'm not getting it right the first time, it took me maybe 10 tries to make the SOL 120's main wings. So I'm not really sure why we have that width issue, because actually it probably is the width. That probably is the problem, because I didn't get my percentages right. Let me just try 0.6 times 1.33 recurring, 0.8. Let's try an 80% change. 0.8 times 2.7. Ah, I just realized what I did wrong. So 0.6 is correct for the percentage. It was 60% of the width needed to remove, not if you want to make it 60%. So actually, you want 40% of the original width. So 0.4 times 2.7. That gives us 1.08, which looks much better. So now we're going to go into Orthographic side view and try and make it line up a bit again. So now, just by using Run to make it look about smooth, we can see that it will be correct when we do the other piece. And since this is a symmetrical wing, not a semi-symmetrical wing, we can actually just take our values from the top piece and put them on the bottom piece, which actually makes this tutorial a bit simpler because there's less parts to explain. Now I just need to fine-tune Run. So for fine-tuning, let's say we start with 2. It's actually relatively simple if you already say aligned Vise. So what I do is I just slowly adjust smaller and smaller values. So I try 1.9, okay, that's not correct, but you don't know 2 is too much. So then we try 9, okay, then we need 8, 7, 9, 8, 7, I think 6, and then 9. 9 looks about right, but in fact, we can actually do it much faster than that if we practiced, so. And there we go. Both of these are very fine-tuned values, not just 1.5 or something. That's important because that way the wing perfectly matches up and it's perfectly seamless. Well, it's not 100% perfect, but it's as best as you can get. And you can actually see that it's very smooth and you can't smell there's probably a line there. But for only probably 10 minutes of actual building, that's a pretty good wing. And something was wrong. For some reason, the Vise and Run cannot be easily copied. Let's just try manually fine-tuning them and see if that fixes it. Actually, yeah, I had the wrong length. That still doesn't really fix it. This is very odd. It doesn't really matter too much, we can just manually fine-tune the bottom pieces. And we seem to have an issue. Oh, I've just realized why the issue occurred. It is because there's another piece here. Let's try this again. And then copy and paste the Run and Vise. And it still is broken. Let's fine-tune this again. And done. I can't explain why the bottom section has a different Vise Run, and notice that is but one basic wing. There's obviously a lot more to do here. Let's just see what it looks like when we put it inside the tail. So I'll just nudge in, and this looks pretty good. And while there is a lot more to do, such as make this control surface, I think it's best to split this video into 2 parts, or maybe even 3, because it's already too long for what I'd like to make a normal video. It's 25 minutes long, and that's just making the base wing. I haven't even really finished the base wing either. I still have this tip that I have yet to explain how to do. So that will be it for this video. In the next video, I'll focus on making the control surface and any other small details. So I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!